Hey there, horror fans and John Carpenter lovers. Welcome back to Real Talk Horror, the podcast where we dissect the spine-tingling, edge-of-your-seat films that have shaped the genre and maybe shaped a few nightmares along the way. I'm your host, Josh, and today we're diving into the gritty, relentless world of Assault on Precinct 13. This is the first episode in Phase 5 of our John Carpenter retrospective, where we tackle his most polarizing works. These are the films that divide fans, spark debates, and keep us coming back for more. So let's talk about today's film. Released in 1976, Assault on Precinct 13 is a crime thriller that evolves into something much darker, with Carpenter's signature DNA coursing through its veins. Now, I know Halloween gets all the credit for putting Carpenter on the map, and rightfully so. It is a masterpiece. But Assault on Precinct 13, this is where his iconic style really first took shape. It's raw, intense, and great at creating tension from simplicity. Why should you care about this film? Well, for one, it's a blueprint for the Carpenter we'd come to know and love. It's got that minimalist storytelling, the creeping suspense, and that unforgettable synth score. We'll talk about the score later as well, but for anyone who loves a good siege movie, this one's a must-watch. It's also fascinating to see Carpenter experimenting, pushing boundaries, and finding his voice in a genre that wasn't quite horror, but felt just as unsettling. So stick around as we break it all down, the plot, the themes, some behind-the-scenes stories, and the lasting impact of this film on Carpenter's career, and even maybe the horror genre as a whole. All right, let's get into it. Buckle up. This is going to be a wild ride. So let's talk about the film itself. Assault on Precinct 13 wastes no time getting your attention. It starts with a bang, literally, and the tension doesn't let up. This gem centers on a small, understaffed police station in LA, one that's mere hours away from shutting down for good. But what begins as a quiet, routine day quickly spirals into chaos when the station becomes the target of a relentless, almost faceless gang. What follows is a siege, an all-out assault where survival isn't just a goal, it's the only option. The story kicks off with multiple threads that Carpenter weaves together masterfully. You've got Lieutenant Ethan Bishop, the no-nonsense, everyman cop assigned to oversee the station on its final day of operation. Meanwhile, a local gang vows brutal revenge after a botched police operation, setting their sights on the precinct. And then there's the transport bus carrying prisoners that's forced to make an emergency stop at the station. These characters and their vastly different lives collide in the most dire of circumstances. This is where Carpenter's brilliance shines. He strips the story down to its essentials. Small group of people, cut off from the outside world, under siege by a seemingly unstoppable force. It's a survival story, one that keeps you on the edge of your seat because no one, not even the characters themselves, knows who they can really trust. And the themes, isolation is front and center. The occupants of the precinct are trapped, physically, metaphorically, in a place where every decision feels like a matter of life or death. You also get Carpenter's sharp commentary on societal decay, violence, mistrust, breakdown of communication. They're all just bubbling under the surface. It's a theme that he revisits time and time again, as we saw Escape from New York and Thing. Moral ambiguity is another big one here. Take Napoleon Wilson, one of the prisoners stranded at the station. He's a convicted killer, but he's also charismatic, funny, and oddly honorable. You can't help but root for him, even as you wonder about the crimes that put him behind bars. Then there's Lee, the station's civilian secretary. She starts out as a background figure, but when the siege intensifies, she steps up in ways that surprise everyone, including herself. These characters are all classic Carpenter. They're flawed and relatable, and they're pushed to their limits. Lieutenant Bishop is just a regular guy trying to do his job, not some super cop with all the answers. His leadership feels authentic because it's born out of necessity, not heroics. And there's the dynamics between Bishop and Wilson, two men that are completely different walks of life, forced to trust each other just to survive. It's tense, it's layered, and at times even darkly humorous. For me, what really sets the film apart is the gang itself. They're almost supernatural in their relentlessness, silent, faceless, and eerily organized. It's like Carpenter's precursor to The Thing, where the enemy isn't just a person or group, it's an overwhelming, nearly unstoppable force. This adds to the film's palpable sense of dread, making every second feel like the calm before another storm of violence. So whether it's the ticking clock tension, the layered characters, or the timeless themes, Assault on Precinct 13 delivers a story that's as gripping now as it was in '76. Carpenter keeps it lean, mean, proving that sometimes, as we see a lot of times in his films, the simplicity is the most effective way to keep us on the edge of our seats. Now let's peel back the curtain on the making of the film, because Assault on Precinct 13's production story is almost as intriguing as the story itself. John Carpenter was a man on a mission, and it shows. This was a passion project through and through, and Carpenter did what he does best. Wore all the hats. He was the writer, the director, the composer, infusing every frame with his distinct creative vision. And here's the kicker. He pulled this off with a budget of just $100,000. Think about that for a second. That's peanuts, even by 1976 standards. But instead of letting the budget limit him, Carpenter turned it into an opportunity, leaning into simplicity, crafting a minimalist set design, using claustrophobic confines of the precinct to his advantage. The tight, almost guerrilla-style filming gave the movie its raw, gritty vibe, making it feel less like a polished Hollywood production and more like a slice of brutal, street-level reality. And the cast wasn't packed with household names, and that works to the film's advantage. Darwin Jostin as Napoleon Wilson is an absolute revelation. His sharp one-liners, delivered with a mix of charm and menace, make him unforgettable. Honestly, if you love Snake Plissken, you'll see the seeds of that character right here in Napoleon. Then there's Lori Zimmer as Lee. She's one of those characters who quietly steals the show. Lee starts out as what you might expect, a civilian caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. But Zimmer's performance brings layers to the role, balancing strength and vulnerability in a way that feels truly authentic. One thing that often gets overlooked in discussions about this film is how well Carpenter directed the ensemble cast. With a mix of seasoned character actors and relative newcomers, he really managed to pull out performances that feel grounded and natural, even as the situation is spiraling into chaos. And that's no feat, especially when you're juggling multiple production roles as well. And you have to talk about the MVP of this film, the entire production, and that's Carpenter's score. And if you've heard it, you've seen this movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The pulsating synth beats grab you from the opening scene and they don't let go. They keep your heart pumping and the action flowing. This wasn't just background music, it was a driving force, creating tension, building dread, and keeping the pace relentless. And what's wild is that Carpenter composed it himself on a relatively simple synthesizer setup. Further proof of his resourcefulness. And this was the beginning of what would become one of Carpenter's most celebrated trademarks. Thinking of Halloween's haunting piano riff or the atmospheric soundscapes of The Thing, it all really started right here. And then behind the scenes, there's challenges, of course. Working on such a tight budget meant that the crew had to be creative. Shooting on location in Los Angeles came with its own set of headaches, including limited time and unpredictable conditions. But that scrappy, make-it-work mentality gives the film an edge. Every corner cut, clever workaround, they all add here to the film's raw authenticity. And the reception, it wasn't a blockbuster. That's never what it was going to be. It was basically a first real studio film after his student film Dark Star that we already talked about. The film had a modest release, and it found an audience over time, kind of foreshadowing the rest of his career. Critics began to appreciate Carpenter's skill in crafting tension and his knack for doing so much with so little. Today, it's recognized as a cult classic and an essential stepping stone in Carpenter's legendary career. In many ways, Assault on Precinct 13 is a testament to what a filmmaker can achieve with sheer determination, creativity, and just a bit of synth magic. It's the kind of film that makes you appreciate the artistry behind the scenes as much as the story on the screen. Now, Carpenter's signature style is unmistakable in Assault on Precinct 13, and it's one of the reasons this film is such an iconic piece of his filmography. Even this early in his work, you can see the hallmarks of his approach to storytelling, visuals, and sound that would later define his career. Starting with the pacing, one of Carpenter's strongest assets. He's not in a rush to overwhelm you with action right out of the gate. Instead, he takes his time, letting the tension simmer. It's methodical, almost like a slow burn. But when the tension finally boils over, it hits with devastating impact. Think about the siege at the precinct. Carpenter doesn't just throw his characters into chaos immediately, he lets the dread build. The attackers are always out there, silent, faceless, and relentless, creating this amazing sense of unease. And this is classic Carpenter, turning space and time into tools to amplify fear. You can draw a direct line here from the relentless gang in this film to Mike Myers or The Shape. Both are forces of nature, unyielding and impossible to reason with. Now let's talk about the score. I've mentioned it already, but Carpenter has mastered the ability to use music to manipulate our emotions. The score is a masterpiece of that minimalism. Those ominous synth beats are more than just background noise. The tracks like the Assault theme almost feel alive, as if the music itself is stalking the characters, waiting to pounce. It's relentless, just like the siege, and it keeps you on edge from start to finish. Carpenter's use of synthesizers here wasn't just innovative for the time. It became one of his defining traits. This soundtrack set the stage for some of his most iconic scores. Again, the haunting piano riff in Halloween, the eerie soundscapes of the fog. You can't talk about Carpenter without mentioning his music, and it all really begins right here. Visually, Carpenter's style is equally distinctive. His use of space is masterful. The precinct feels like a fortress, but it's also a trap, a prison where safety and danger coexist. The way he frames his shots makes you feel every inch of that tension. Carpenter often employs tight framing, keeping the characters confined within the screen, emphasizing their lack of escape. At the same time, his use of wide-angle lenses adds a sense of scale, showing us the vastness of the danger surrounding them. It's a technique that he would perfect in later films like The Thing, where the isolation and claustrophobia are almost unbearable. The muted color palette plays into this as well. Everything feels washed out, almost lifeless, which mirrors the bleakness of the situation. There's no warmth here, no safe haven. The world he creates is cold and unfeeling, and that's intentional. It's not just a visual choice, it's a storytelling one. The world outside the precinct is just as hostile as the gang trying to break in, underscoring the film's themes of isolation and societal decay. Carpenter also has an incredible knack for using silence. There are moments in this film where the absence of sound is just as effective as the music. When the siege begins, there are stretches of eerie quiet, broken only by the sudden bursts of violence. This use of silence forces us to sit with the tension, making every sound, every gunshot, every scream hit so much harder. And then there's Carpenter's approach to narrative structure. He's not interested in spoon-feeding his audience. And we already see that on this film already. The gang remains nameless, faceless, motives unexplained. It's a bold choice, but it works because it taps into a primal fear, the fear of the unknown. Carpenter isn't concerned with why they're attacking. He's focused on how the characters respond. This is about survival, plain and simple. And that's what makes it so compelling. This kind of stripped down storytelling became a hallmark of his career, and it allowed us to project our fears onto the film rather than us being told what to be afraid of. Ultimately, that makes Assault on Precinct 13 so uniquely Carpenter. It's how every element, pacing, music, visuals, and narrative all work together to create an atmosphere of unrelenting tension. This is a film that grabs hold of you and doesn't let go, and that's the Carpenter magic in action. Even this early in his career, he was proving that he could do more with less, using his creativity to overcome budget constraints and deliver something truly unforgettable. Let's look at the lasting impact and legacy of Assault on Precinct 13, a film that, while not a box office juggernaut, has certainly carved out a significant place in cinema history and in the heart of John Carpenter's fans. First, let's talk about how this film found its audience. Initially, Precinct 13 didn't exactly light up the box office. With its modest $100,000 budget and limited release, it didn't have the kind of promotional muscle to make it a hit. But here's the thing about Carpenter's work. It thrives on that word of mouth, and that's exactly what happened here. The film quickly garnered a cult following, especially among genre fans who recognized its brilliance. Over time, critics reevaluated it, praising its genre-blending nature and the bold storytelling. Today, it's seen as one of Carpenter's pivotal works, a stepping stone to the iconic films that would define his career. Speaking of its genre-blending nature, one of the reasons the film stands out is because it doesn't fit neatly into any one box. Is it a crime thriller, a siege movie, a horror film? Well, the answer is yes to all of the above. Carpenter skillfully pulls elements from multiple genres and weaves them together into something entirely his own. This ability to blend genres would become the hallmark of his career, evident in his later works, The Thing, which marries science fiction with body horror, Big Trouble in Little China, a wild mix of action, comedy, fantasy, and martial arts. The influences of Assault on Precinct 13 isn't just limited to Carpenter's own filmography. Its DNA can be seen in countless movies that followed. Let's start with its connection to Howard Hawks' Rio Bravo. Carpenter has openly acknowledged the inspiration, calling Assault on Precinct 13 a modern-day homage to the classic Western. The idea of a small group of people, isolated and under siege, is a timeless concept, and Carpenter updated it with a gritty urban twist. That concept has since been borrowed and reimagined in films like The Purge, which takes the idea of relentless attackers and builds a dystopian nightmare around it. And it's not just the premise that's been influential. Carpenter's approach to tension building has become a blueprint for many filmmakers. His ability to create suspense through pacing, atmosphere, and character dynamics is something that directors across genres have tried to emulate. Take the film like Green Room, for instance. While it's a very different story, you can feel the influence of Assault on Precinct 13 in the way it traps its characters in a single location, forcing them to confront both external threats and their own survival instincts. And then bringing it back to Carpenter's own body of work, the themes and techniques he honed on this film became the foundation for much of his career. The tension and dread that permeate the film are echoed in Halloween, where Michael Myers' silent menace stalks his victims. The themes of survival and isolation resurface in The Thing, arguably one of the greatest examples of a siege movie ever made, albeit with a terrifying, otherworldly twist. Even the moral ambiguity we see in characters like Napoleon Wilson feels like the precursor to later anti-heroes like Snake Plissken in Escape from New York. And you can't forget the influence of the music. The pulsating score of Assault on Precinct 13 was groundbreaking at the time, and it's impossible to overstate its impact on film scoring. Carpenter's approach to music, using it not just as background but as an integral part of the storytelling, has influenced countless composers. You can hear echoes of his style in everything from the Stranger Things theme to modern horror films like It Follows. Finally, Assault on Precinct 13 has cemented its place as a cultural touchstone because of its timeless themes. The idea of people from different walks of life coming together to face a common enemy feels as relevant today as it ever did. It's a film that taps into those universal fears: being trapped, being hunted, being pushed to your limits. And those fears don't have an expiration date. That's why it continues to resonate with new audiences decades and decades later. In the end, Assault on Precinct 13 isn't just an early Carpenter film. It's like a statement of intent. It's a film that says, this is who I am as a filmmaker, this is what I can do. And what he did was create a piece of cinema that has stood the test of time, influencing filmmakers, thrilling audiences, and solidifying his place as one of the true masters of not just horror, but suspense. So let's talk a little bit more about the reception of Assault on Precinct 13 over the years, because it's a story of underdog resilience, much like the characters in the film itself. When Precinct 13 was first released, the reception in the United States wasn't earth-shattering. It was a modest budget film from a relatively unknown director, so it didn't grab a ton of attention. The critics were lukewarm, and audiences obviously didn't flock to see it. But it didn't take long for the audience to find the film. While it struggled initially in the US, it was embraced pretty quickly overseas, particularly in France. French critics saw something in Assault on Precinct 13 that the American audiences initially missed. A bold, stylish piece of genre filmmaking with a distinct artistic vision. In fact, it was so well received that it won acclaim at the Cannes Film Festival, which is pretty remarkable for a gritty little siege movie. French cinephiles admired Carpenter's ability to channel the spirit of Howard Hawks' westerns while crafting something that felt modern and raw. They saw it not just as a thriller, but as a piece of cinematic art. This overseas acclaim helped bolster Carpenter's reputation and gave the film a second wind it sorely needed. And slowly but surely it began to gain traction as more people discovered its unique blend of that relentless tension, the sharp character dynamics, the unforgettable score. And over the years, it's become clear that Assault on Precinct 13, as is the case with so many of Carpenter's films, was ahead of its time. What might have seemed like just another B movie in 1976 has grown into a respected classic. Fast forward to today, and the film has a reputation solid as a rock. Modern critics and audiences alike recognize its importance, not just within Carpenter's filmography, but within the thriller and horror genre as a whole. It's viewed as a cornerstone of Carpenter's career, a film that set the stage for his later masterpieces and demonstrated his ability to deliver nail-biting tension on a shoestring budget. It's also worth noting how well the film is aged. Sure, some of the elements are a little dated, but the themes, survival, isolation, and society breakdown, are all as relevant now as they were then. In an era where genre films are often revisited and re-examined, Assault on Precinct 13 stands tall as one that not only holds up, but continues to inspire. Filmmakers today still cite it as a major influence, and its DNA is all over modern thrillers and horror. So while its road to recognition wasn't instant, Assault on Precinct 13 proves that sometimes great art just needs time to find an audience. And when it does, it's here to stay. So let's get right into the heart of Assault on Precinct 13 with a discussion and analysis of what makes this film such a standout in Carpenter's repertoire and in genre filmmaking as a whole. First, we have to talk about that scene. Yes, the infamous ice cream truck moment. If you've seen the movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's one of the most shocking and unflinching scenes in the film, and honestly in 70s cinema overall. Without giving too much away for those who haven't seen it, Carpenter does something here that not only rattles the audience, but establishes the stake of the story with a brutal clarity. What makes this moment so effective isn't gore or over-the-top visuals, it's the sheer audacity of the act and the way Carpenter builds up to it. The scene unfolds slowly, luring you into a false sense of security with its everyday setting, then bam, hits you like a freight train. It's raw, it's shocking, and it reminds you that no one is safe. All these years, nearly 50 years later, it still resonates because it taps into something primal, our fear of violence erupting in the mundane. But Assault on Precinct 13 is more than just shocking moments. One of the things that sets it apart is its ability to blend genres so seamlessly. On one level, it's a classic siege thriller, a group of characters trapped in an isolated location, forced to fend off an overwhelming enemy. But there's also a clear horror undercurrent. The gang members outside the precinct are like faceless, relentless monsters, and they evoke the same kind of dread that Carpenter would later perfect with Michael Myers in Halloween. And then there's the Western influence. Carpenter, like I said, cited Howard Hawks' Rio Bravo as a major influence for this film, and you can feel that throughout. The lone lawman defending his territory, the ragtag group of unlikely allies, the standoff against impossible odds, it's all there, but transplanted into a gritty urban setting. The film is one that defies easy categorization. Like I said, it's a Western, it's a thriller, it's a horror movie, and yet it's entirely its own thing. And it's more impressive because of the budget constraints. When you only have $100,000 to work with, you have to rely on ingenuity rather than flashy effects or big-name stars. And honestly, that limitation might be one of the film's greatest strengths. The stripped-down production gives it a raw, almost documentary-like feel. The claustrophobic setting of the precinct feels more oppressive because it's so bare bones, and the minimalist approach to the action keeps the focus squarely on the characters and the tension. Speaking of characters, can't forget how they elevate the film. Lieutenant Ethan Bishop, Napoleon Wilson, and Lee are more than just archetypes. They're compelling, well-drawn individuals who bring heart and humanity to the story. Their interactions, their choices, their sacrifices give the film emotional weight. So what makes it stand out? It's Carpenter's ability to take these disparate elements from the thriller, horror, western, and fuse them all into something greater than the sum of its parts. It's his knack for building tension out of simplicity, for creating relatable characters in extraordinary situations, and for crafting moments that linger in your mind long after the credits roll. This is a film that punches well above its weight class, delivering thrills, chills, and substance in equal measure, and it's no wonder it remains such an enduring piece of Carpenter's legacy and of genre cinema as a whole. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Assault on Precinct 13, it's clear that while this may not be the flashiest entry in Carpenter's filmography, it is undeniably one of the most foundational. This movie isn't about big special effects or massive spectacle. It's about raw, unrelenting tension and tight economical filmmaking. For a first-time viewer, it might not immediately wow you with its visual flair. But if you're paying attention, you'll see a master at work, laying the groundwork for so many of his future classics. Carpenter's ability to take a simple premise, a siege at a rundown police station, and turn it into a pulsating thriller speaks volumes about his storytelling chops. For me, personally, this score, a solid 7 out of 10. It's gripping, it's intense, and it's a must-watch for not only Carpenter's fans, but for anyone who appreciates a well-crafted siege movie. The film's impact extends far beyond its modest budget, and it's one of those movies that improves with age. I find myself drawn to it again and again because of how it taps into that universal fear of isolation, survival, and human conflict. It's not a perfect film, but it is a significant one in Carpenter's career and in the history of the thriller and horror cinema. Now, if you thought Assault on Precinct 13 was intense, just wait for the next film in our retrospective. We're diving headfirst into Escape from LA, and let me tell you, this one's going to be crazy. Spoiler alert, I've got a lot of opinions on this one. It's a polarizing movie for sure, but that's what makes it fun to talk about. I'll break it down for you, so stay tuned. And thank you all for tuning in to this episode of Real Talk Horror. If you enjoyed the episode, please do me a favor, rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts. Your feedback helps us grow and reach more horror lovers like you. Also, don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Threads at Real Talk, and feel free to share your thoughts on Assault on Precinct 13. I'd love to hear what you think about it. And until next time, stay spooky and keep that horror love alive.